My name is Michaela Baltazar Fine. I work at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. I am so thrilled today to have all of you joining from all over, not just here in Minnesota and the Twin Cities, but we have somebody from Canada online, which is really exciting. We also have people from out of state. So welcome and thank you very much for joining today. Today is the virtual opening day program for the contemporary print. 20 years at Highpoint Editions. And we are going to be doing a virtual tour for you today, followed by a Q&A session with Dennis Jon of the Minneapolis Institute of Art and Cole Rogers, the co-founder and master printer at Highpoint. To welcome you today, I'd like to introduce Katie Luber, who is the Niven and Duncan Macmillan Director and President at MIA.
Thank you, Michaela, and welcome everyone. I love, this is one of the things I love about COVID is that we get to welcome people from Canada, from all points across the nation. And normally we would be doing this at the museum, and I'm sorry you're not all here at the museum with us, but this is next best. And I think it's something that we'll have to continue to do. So my name, as Michaela said, is Katie Luber, and I'm the Niven and Duncan Macmillan Director and President of the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And it is my incredible pleasure to welcome you here today for this virtual tour of MIA's newest special exhibition, the Contemporary Print, 20 Years at Highpoint Editions, which opened today in our Target galleries. This is MIA's first special exhibition since the pandemic started in March of 2020. So it's truly a red letter day for us. And I'm so happy that you can be here to celebrate with us. So the Contemporary Print 20 Years at Highpoint Editions showcases 175 selections from Highpoint's complete archives, which MIA recently added to the museum's permanent collection. So everything that you're seeing will be in the care of MIA for our public and for public access from now on. And you will hear a little bit later from, you'll get to have this virtual tour, and then you'll have a chance to ask the curator, Dennis Jon, and the founder, Cole Rogers, any questions that you want. So the exhibition itself covers a broad range of printmaking techniques, styles, and subjects, including preliminary drawings and working proofs. There will also be printmaking demonstrations with visiting artists throughout the exhibition to better appreciate this expressive art form. Artists that are included in the exhibition include Carlos Amorales, Julie Buffalo Head, Willie Cole, Sarah Crowner, Jim Hodges, Delita Martin, Julie Maritou, Todd Norstein, Chloe Peen, David Rathman, Doho Suh, and Gianni Whitehawk. So both an extraordinarily diverse and rich group of artists, both from Minnesota, but the nation and the world as a whole. In short, this is an inspiring installation and one that will make you very proud of what our Twin Cities arts and cultural organizations are achieving. This show recognizes the role of the arts in our local community while also emphasizing the impact of the Twin Cities on the international art world. Both MIA and Highpoint are important pillars regionally. We do a lot of work for the community, both of us, but the work of our organizations goes far beyond Minnesota, as both MIA and Highpoint seek to engage in important global discussions and showcase artists from around the world. I'd like to thank now Dennis Jon, our Associate Curator in the Department of Global Contemporary Art at MIA, for organizing this exhibition. I'm also grateful to Highpoint co-founders Carla McGrath and Cole Rogers for thinking of MIA's collection as a home for the Highpoint Editions archive. It is an honor. And I just want to say as an aside that what Carla and Cole have achieved in their 20 years at Highpoint Editions is nothing short of miraculous. And they do it with the most wonderful warmth, humility, and just straightforward honesty I've ever experienced in my entire career of working in museums. So I'm really so grateful for them both for entrusting the archive to Mia, but also for being such wonderful people. So Cole, give Carla my regards and tell her how grateful I am for your warmth and generosity to me, a newcomer. Finally, I would be remiss if I didn't thank our supporters and sponsors for making the exhibition possible. So one of our lead sponsors is Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters has been an ardent supporter of the arts for the Twin Cities for many years. Ameriprise Financial, likewise, Best Buy, Delta Airlines, J.E. Dunn Construction, Wells Fargo, Artful Living, Susan and Rob White, Libby Andrus and Roby Thompson, the Association of Research Institutes in Art History, Carrie and Sky Falver, Catherine and James Ganley, and the Mall of America. I'd also like to thank our media partner, the Star Tribune. So thank you all for being with us, because we do what we do for you. And now I'd like to turn it over to Dennis Jon and Cole Rogers, and you'll get to have a great virtual tour now.
Thank you, Katie. This has been a labor of love for me and for my team here at MIA. We have actually parallel projects. We have about 15 staff members on each of our team, and has been working on this for about 3.5 years. And like you, I want to express my appreciation to Carla McGrath and Cole Rogers. None of this would be possible without their generous support and cooperation over the years. The contemporary print is something of a celebration. It's a celebration of our acquisition of Highpoint Editions archive here at MIA. It is, of course, its debut, but it's also a celebration of 20 years of Highpoint. They really began as a rather modest storefront operation on the south side of Minneapolis, and have grown into a nationally prominent collaborative workshop. So the Highpoint Editions archive will live on. It's meant to be part, it is part of the permanent collection, meant to live on perpetuity. I should mention there is a parallel project that was launched yesterday, and that is a complete digital catalog raisonné of the entirety of production of Highpoint, which comprises about 300 published prints and multiples, along with more than 1,000 pieces of what we call ancillary material, working and trial proofs, progressive state proofs, drawings, color tests, and print matrices. And as you'll see in the tour, the number of those items are actually included in the show, again, to show the sometimes mysterious processes of printmaking. It really is the #1 question we get whenever we have a print show here at MIA. And I know Cole will go into greater detail about that. I'm actually sitting in the print study room beginning in February of 2022. At the conclusion of the contemporary print exhibition, this room will be the access point to see the Highpoint Editions archive at MIA. We're open during museum hours, daytime business hours, and anyone can come in and see just about anything that is part of the Highpoint Editions archive. So we invite you to see that. But if you do want to take a look at that catalog raisonné, which had a separate team of about 15 staff members working on, we were very proud to have launched that yesterday afternoon. And just go to the main MIA website page and you'll see a link on that page. But thanks for joining us.
Well, and I'd just like to jump in really quickly and thank everyone at MIA for this wonderful repository for our archive, and being such a wonderful partner, as well as all the Highpoint staff that have made this possible over the years. And I'll leave it there so that we might have some time for the Q&A later.
Hi everyone, I'm Dennis Michael Jon. I'm Associate Curator of Global Contemporary Art here at the Minneapolis Institute of Art. And we're in the first gallery of our brand new exhibition called The Contemporary Print, 20 Years at Highpoint Editions. We're going to give you a broad overview today, informal walkthrough of the gallery. It's quite an extensive gallery show, but about 175 pieces all told. and it shows the history of Highpoint Editions. Of course, many of you are familiar with Highpoint. It's a community resource that is well known. And I'm here with Cole Rogers, who is the artistic director and master printer at Highpoint Editions. And we're going to do just a conversational walkthrough of the show. And Cole's going to provide a lot of the technical background. I think these stories are quite interesting to learn about. And I'll be prompting him throughout the walkthrough. The focus of the show is first, of course, to show outstanding works of art, which are coming out of Highpoint. And also, but it's the debut of the Highpoint Editions archive at MIA. In December 2020, the museum acquired the 20-year complete archive of Highpoint, which entails an impression of each of the published prints, plus a selection of unique prints. And in addition to that, over 1,000 pieces of what we call ancillary production material, trial and working proofs, drawings, matrices, showing how prints are made. Printmaking can sometimes be a bit of a mysterious process. So these materials help, especially in didactic displays or for visitors. The archive will be accessible beginning in February in that print study room on the first floor. And we've, of course, sprinkled ancillary material throughout this exhibition. Again, to show the behind the scenes are sometimes mysterious processes, the unseen processes of printmaking. I've been at MIA a long time, and whenever I do a print show or installation, it still is the number one question is, how is it made? It's maybe not evident, some maybe have more experience with printmaking, but we want to answer that question right up front, and as we walk through, you will see some of the didactic material. So let's begin. So we're in the first gallery, and in the first half of the first gallery, we've created a bit of a didactic or an educational space. We have a series of diagrammatic panels that explain the 5 main traditional printmaking methods, and Highpoint Editions is a traditional print workshop, meaning that they don't specialize on digital, but really on the sometimes century-old processes from intaglio to relief, lithography, screen printing, etc. We also have in this space a progressive proof set by David Rathman on the left, and we have a marvelous matrix. Matrix, by the way, is just another word for printing plate or block. This one's quite dramatic because of its size. And behind me we have 2 early prints from 2004-2005 by Julie Meritu, Ethiopian-born American artist. Somewhat of a hybrid. These are abstractions. She calls them psychogeographies. It's kind of a blend of existing diagrams, maps of public spaces where she feels power emanates. On top of that is her own, shall we say, color scheme and gestural composition, blends it together. They are conceptual, they are abstract at the same time, and I think they're also, of course, aesthetically appealing. I'm going to ask Cole to address in just a second about how this print was made, but I wanted to point to this small screen down here. We have 3 what are called flip books, progressive proof state flip books. What they are books of progressive states that are printed on Mylar. And as you page through them, you can actually see how these layered prints are made layer by layer. We were unable to, of course, have these flip books within the gallery to be handled, so we made virtual flip books, and they're on this screen here on a loop. And I think they're quite interesting to see, again, to show what you can't see in the work of art. It's just an added feature. But I wanted to ask Cole to address the making of this print, which was quite complex, but a very successful project for Highpoint.
Yes, it really displays a lot of what Julie was doing at that time in her painting. Screen printing was chosen for most of the bold areas of color, which she had been using in the work at that time. And she would use repeatograph and ink on subsequent layers, which was rendered more or less in lithography. She built this up over 32 different layers, and several of them are transparent white, which gives it a really beautiful atmospheric effect, kind of deepening the layer of the piece. While working on that, she was doing these repeatograph drawings that were gorgeous on their own, but got a bit buried with the screen printing, and so we tried something unique to me, which was printing lithographically on very thin, gompy
paper. It's thinner than tracing paper, and 4 of those were sheen collated on top of each other to produce this piece. So it's a massive sheen collé and just a really gorgeous piece from her work at that time.
And I understand 3 of the layers that are in this are actually in this print beneath the color portion, the screen portion.
3 of the, actually 4. And after working on this, and we tried this and it worked, Julie asked to have the drawings returned so that she could rework them to make it appropriate for this piece.
Nice. On the far wall, we have a nice comparison. This is Rob Fisher's Dodgeball. Rob Fisher, originally from Minnesota, New York based now. Probably one of Highpoint's largest prints, a diptych, and I think you can see they are floorboards meant to emulate a gymnasium floor. The word dodgeball, of course, is I don't know if it's a sport, but it's an activity that I remember from junior high school. Not everyone liked to play dodgeball, but it was quite ubiquitous at that time. The floorboards are recycled, found, fabricated here. Fisher is very well known as a sculptor, especially of found materials. He does a lot of installations, and I think that was part of maybe the starting point for his project. But on top of the floorboards, he's added these snippets of color, which are actually screen printed on. And if you could talk about the printing process.
Right. Well, Rob, as a sculptor, had been using floorboards to redefine space within galleries. When he did an installation at the Hammer Museum, they sourced floorboards which actually had little pieces of color from a gymnasium floor, which looked to him much like paintings from the 30s. And the other part of this that is interesting is he wanted to reference Francis Bacon, who has many diagonals in his pieces. But the actual printing, as you can see, the grain of the wood, scars or whatever, are printed in intaglio. This is almost like a large etching. It is, the ink is applied, it's wiped off of the surface, the black is printed, and then there's a very transparent khaki screen print over it, and then the screen printed colors. And it's just a really fabulous piece that shows how easy traditional printmaking can be hacked to produce something new and really exciting.
Beautiful, beautiful piece. So on the opposite side of the baffle, we have 3 works by the Boston-based painter and printmaker Joel Janowitz, another of the early residents at Highpoint Editions. Joel is well known to MIA curators. We've acquired his work over the years, both in watercolor and in monotype. He's very comfortable with the painting method, the gestural. He was actually a student of Michael Mazer when he studied in Massachusetts. And he did a number of works on the greenhouse. And these greenhouses actually are located at Wellesley College, where Joel once taught. They're some of my favorite works. The 2 pieces on the left are called Scroll, and it's vertical diptych on the right. And they're meant to be evocative of being in a greenhouse, the various layers of transparency and opacity, and of course this marvelous, marvelous color. Joel, I think it's fair to say, struggled a little bit with the lithographic process. He's more comfortable with monotyping. So actually these are hybrids, whereby the scroll pieces are actually printed in lithography, and then over the top are monotypes. A monotype is simply a painting on a hard surface in whatever material you choose, but it's then transferred to this top of over the top of the lithography base. As a result, each print in the edition is different, so we call those variable editions. Can you add to that?
Well, and likewise, this one actually is all lithography with hand editions in watercolor, which is not uncommon for an artist to do. Joel, very much so in trying to create atmosphere and light, found it difficult to work with some of the surfaces that required a little bit more planning. He works very much so by feel. Color is very important to him, and obviously very different from Julie Meritou's very hard-edged pieces.
Yeah, I think they're absolutely beautiful pieces. We'll go into the next gallery. In this bay of the gallery, we have several works by the Argentine-born Santiago Kuju, he's based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin now, and made a number, as you can see, large-scale pieces, worked in series. Some of the pieces where you see the series, they're actually partial series. I wanted to show as much work as possible, especially if there was a variety of work. There's some additional work by Santiago here. But this is sort of the star of his productions. It's called Architectonic versus HR. Dates to 2006, sorry, and 2006. And it's, I would call it a conceptual piece. It is a bit of a mashup of his own sketches and his own photography that is present in the black and white portions. The black and white portions are printed in lithography. The color is screen printed. You have to really get up close and take some time with this piece to see what's going on. But it's basically, well, based on the title, people in usually urban environments or in buildings. Some are vertical, some are horizontal. According to his own writings, Santiago, his photography and his images have to do with paradoxes and what he considers bizarre in everyday life. And you'll see that in some of these images. I know, Cole, you thought that perhaps this piece was a bit large to market, and yet it did quite well.
It did, and this piece was done in a period that he was doing quite a few wall drawings, and some of those wall drawings would be put into a corner of a room, the outside corner of a room, may wrap around, so he wanted something that was modular that could be installed in different ways, and he would be fine with this being installed as one single line. It could be installed in a corner. Sometimes it's been shown just the 4 middle panels, but he's very interested in the ability for it to change and adapt, much like our own perception of our lives.
Yeah, very good. And I should point out that these are composite panels. Each is separate to accommodate variant installations. This is a work by Cameron Martin called Conflation, dated 2006. It's actually one of my favorite of the Highpoint productions. Cameron grew up in Washington State, and what you're looking at is his interpretation of Mount Rainier. If you've been to Seattle or the area, Mount Rainier looms large on the horizon. If it's not foggy or cloudy, it's visible, it's there. It really is an iconic presence. He has taken an image and greatly distilled it, so that there's very little detail in the composition, and yet completely describable using these, what might be called toxic colors, these deep violets, eggplant. And it is a commentary, and it's a commentary on perhaps the lack of stewardship of our natural spaces, the commodification of landscape. It almost comes off as an icon, almost an emblem. And I think it's a beautiful piece. It has that kind of duality, that slightly critical content, and yet has obviously aesthetic appeal. We did have a flip book provided by Highpoint for the archive, which we've now created a virtual version of it. I understand this has 39 layers of color in it?
Yes, and Cameron was really interesting to work with because he was always a couple of steps ahead. Each of these colors that went down, each of those set up for the next color. There are a lot of blends like you'd see in traditional ukiyo-e style woodcuts, but a blend would go down and it really wouldn't make as much sense until the next color went down, trapping it, defining it, showing it. And this piece, with 39 colors, they're very, very transparent, which is unique for a screen print. Most screen prints have very opaque ink films. That's what they're good at. But that's the reason why this piece is very dark, but has a lot of light. That transparent ink film allows the light to bounce off of the paper underneath, come back out, and give you a glow, much like an oil painting versus a gouache, which the light's coming off of the top. So it's a really beautiful piece, very quiet piece, and just has a lot of beauty emanating from it.
A lot of mystery to it. To me, it feels mysterious. It's obviously not your normal color range, but as Cole said, I think it's an outstanding and a beautiful piece. Yeah. So we'll move into the next gallery. And another one of my favorite Highpoint artists is the Mexican artist Carlos Amorales, who was very proficient at Highpoint Editions and made, I think, over 40 different prints, usually in series. And so what we've done in this space is include 3 complete series and 1 additional here. So we actually have 4 series from him. And Carlos, for this project this was 2010, I believe, approximately. 08, thank you for correcting me, 2008. Was working from something called the Liquid Archive. And this was an archive that he created of images. They're actually called vector drawings. They're silhouetted images that he collected from his own photographs and found sources that included pop culture, Mexican history, sports, nature. And you'll see that, and they're generally small. And in this case, all of the prints that you can see in this bay actually are made from small acrylic templates. And they're cut, laser cut, and laser incised. So they can be printed both relief, surface, and intaglio, which is beneath the surface. And Cole, can you tell us particularly about the snake glyphs? You know, to me, this is one of the most dramatic sets, and I think you said that you almost declined the project because of its complexity.
Almost, because of the plastic plates that were being used to produce these were originally templates for drawing, not printing. And when Carlos brought them in, he encountered a few problems using them the way he thought. So as Dennis said, we started using them as printing matrices. But these pieces, when Carlos first proposed them, the original composition was done on Photoshop, and he pretty much used a stamp tool to make the design, and he wanted us to print these small acrylic pieces. I believe this one has 157 of these little acrylic pieces. They can't overlap. They would break. They'd shatter going through the press. So in an area like this where you have so many overlapping, you can only print a certain number at once. You've got a 7-foot by 4-foot piece of paper that needs to go through the press 14 to 17 times. That has to be in alignment every time. The paper has to be wet every time. It's very difficult to keep your paper the same moisture. It stretches going through the press. And when Carlos proposed this, I said, no, there's just, it would not be a possible project. And he said, please try it. He did. It was beautiful. And at that point, you just can't say no. So we said, we'll make these in a series of 3, which we oftentimes do. We have to think about when we're doing editions, where they're going to live, and he wanted these to live together. So it's a lot of real estate, so we made small edition so that it would be reasonable and something that we could do, and I think they're just stunning pieces.
I should point out that the image is a bird of prey, just the head, that's repeated over and over and over. So there really is only one template. You made multiples to print them, but it's a single image that he's overlapped to create these snake glyphs.
Yes, which I really love the blending of the bird of prey with the snake, which relates to the eagle on the cactus, which is symbolic of Mexico City, I believe, which is where he lives.
Yep. On the opposite side of the gallery, we're going to talk a little bit about Todd Norstein and his marvelous work from 2010 called Ceaseless, Endless, Timeless, Boundless. Todd made at least 3 visits to Highpoint over the years. early on, and then even very recently, this is sort of in his middle realm, and was very interested in text-based pieces. And this, to me, is a real tour de force of Highpoint technological innovation. It is a trompe-l'oeil, or fool the eye piece. From a distance and even close up, it looks like blue painter's tape that has made the letters and the words of the composition. And I know I've heard Cole talk about the technical aspects of this, and it was a real challenge for you, is that right?
It was. To build the illusion, which really you need to be closer than the camera, so come to the exhibition, but to build up the layers so there's actual physical relief where you get a highlight on the top of something, a shadow underneath, like you would a piece of tape. We had to print each piece 11 times. And with screen printing, you have to have a little bit of time for the ink to dry in between. So when you're printing something over a course of several days, humidity takes effect on the paper. Once again, we have a huge piece of paper which likes to grow when it's more humid and shrink when it's less humid. So that was a real challenge. This, as Dennis said, is a wonderful piece. Not only is a trompe-l'oeil in deceiving the person that it is tape, but also tape. He's commenting on tape in art. Art or tape is usually used to define something, is removed. It's never the subject. It is here. The image is tape, something that's meant to be thrown away, not meant to be archival, not meant to be art. And then he presses the matter further with lithography down here, making the appearance of scuffs and trying to challenge the viewer to accept something that looks like trash as art.
Right. Excellent. So we'll move into the next gallery. And we're in what we're calling the Beauties gallery. This is 28 intaglio and relief prints by the American artist Willie Cole. I know Cole has told me that Willie Cole was on his short list of artists when Highpoint first opened in 2001. It took nearly a decade, though, before he actually arrived and was willing to make prints. But when he did, he made some extraordinary art, and I think over 4 dozen prints, including these prints called the Beauties. There's actually 2 sets, subset on the far wall, 5 Beauties Rising, but the rest from the Beauties series. They're all printed from, as Cole will explain, ironing boards. The genesis of the set, many of you may know Willie Cole is a well-known artist addressing African American experience and culture, and he often will find common household objects that for him become metaphors for his messages. And commonly, among those common objects are the iron and the ironing board. He's made a number of prints in the past that reference ships of the transatlantic slave trade. And actually in the next gallery, you'll see his use of the flat iron or the iron, the soul of the iron. They're meant to be metaphoric. In this case, this is a commentary on both enslaved and free domestic workers and the drudgery of that work. Almost always women. Within his own family, some of his ancestors worked as domestic workers. It is a commemorization of them, and they're often hidden stories, they're hidden narratives. So it's a collective, but they're also individuals. So he has put a name, attached a name to each of these prints at the bottom. Some of the names are real from his ancestors, some are fictitious. And the work is very contemplative. So we created an environment in here that would reinforce that. So the lights are a little bit lower in here. We've changed the color a little bit. And it's meant to be a space that you can linger and think. Contemplative, sometimes there may be some melancholy because these are difficult pieces in terms of their content. I see them as kind of ghost-like, almost apparitions, or even weathered headstones, which of course are traditional markers of life. And I know these also rank among the most technically complex in terms of totally innovative in how you and Willie worked in collaboration to pull this off. It's quite a nice story.
Yes, well, initially Willie started with the woodcut, several lithographs, and we moved on to this by flattening an ironing board and trying to print it, and it was really a wonderful piece. He was very excited about it. We only had a few available. He went back to his studio in New Jersey. We did not want to get duplicate ironing boards, so we had to search. We cleaned out all the Salvation Armies, all the garage sales, Craigslist, in search for these. We flattened them, and in flattening them, they have these residual scars, and I think that's a large part the patina of life that is here, I think really appealed to Willie, much like our bodies receive trauma and carry it forward. And so he felt that it was just a really, really important series, and it has affected quite a few audiences. And I think that anyone that sees these in person, even if they're not a print aficionado, really appreciates them. And over here, we have one of the ironing boards that had been flattened, was used as a printing matrix, and the resulting print. And I think that one of the first things that people that know about prints assumes are that it's photo-based or that it has been transferred somewhere or somehow. And for me, whenever possible, I like to cleave as closely as possible to the original object. And so no matter how many of these ironing board prints are out in the world, each one of them has touched this piece that the artist himself flattened, worked on, and so their life is extended out into the world and actually touched by the original object.
On the far wall are 3 works from Aaron Spangler's series of prints he called Luddite. These are woodcuts. Aaron is best known as a sculptor. He's actually a self-taught wood carver. Mia actually owns a major example of his sculpture, which is on view selectively. He is an incredible talent. And he came to Highpoint and used his skill as a carver to create these woodcuts, which are actually carved from planks of basswood that were milled near his home. He happens to live in north central Minnesota, outside of Park Rapids. And these pieces actually comment on his environment there. There are groups of people that live nearby. It could be described as a Christian subculture, off the grid, if you will. Isolated, self-reliant. They engage in home births, homeschooling, self-healing, farming, and specifically non-urban, if you will. And also to separate themselves from secular government, authority, etc. So they're somewhat isolated, and some are heavily armed. And so Aaron's series comments on that culture that he experiences. He sees his neighbors. Aaron lives a different lifestyle. And the piece in the center is actually called Separatists. So it's about this separation, this Christian community near Park Rapids. And these are carved, hand carved. Aaron likes to work intuitively. I find that incredible that he does, apparently without drawings, and does these marvelous, I call them amalgams, of different imagery. You can see, I think you can see human figures on the left and right, and actually there's a profile in here somewhere. There's also weapons. There's scoped rifles crossed here in the center, barbed wire down here. There's some additional weaponry down here. Strongly aesthetic. I find these very, very appealing, but also with a rich content and commentary. Again, observations of his own experience. What's interesting also about these pieces, despite Highpoint's very expensive etching and other presses, the entire set was hand printed. And Cole's going to explain why you chose that route.
Sure, sure. Well, Aaron is used to working with very rough planks that he then removes the majority of the volume from, and then the resulting finish is something that he does. But in this case, he took the planks directly from the mill, and you can still see milling marks. And normally the bottom piece would be cut away or whatever, so he really wasn't worried about whether or not it matched. And oftentimes to start these, he will either have someone lay or he'll lay objects. I wouldn't be surprised if these rifles were actually his and he drew around them. And then as he starts carving into that, and it's really interesting that he used a lot of non-traditional tools. You can see these marks are very unique, not what you would expect from a usual wood carving. He uses things that he actually pounds into the surface. And worked on this. He had most of the carving done before he had us proof it. We proofed it. He carved more. We would proof it. But in the proofing, we realized that there's no way that we could get it through a regular press because it's not flat at all. There's no way that it would work. So we ended up using very, very thin Kozo paper that was laid over the block after it was inked. And we started out with about 5-inch in diameter Japanese disc barons. There were 6 of us. We printed the entire thing with the disc baron. At that point, the paper was adhered to the block, and the reason why it's lighter here and darker here was after its adherence with the larger, softer tools, we went back with kitchen spoons, wooden spoons, and went over areas which darkened it. And Aaron helped. I said it took 6 of us to produce a 5-foot by 9-foot piece. When we were finished, we took that piece, laid it aside. We would ink up the block again, and then we would use the previous piece that was laid upside down so that we're seeing through the back in order to print the next one in the same configuration. And they're just some of my favorite pieces, and it's really wonderful to have this more atmospheric situation out here with the more graphic, traditional woodcut or wood block elements. And once we established that, then we started pushing it a little further and say this piece fence lines where there's actually 2 or 3 different levels of tonality according to how hard we pressed on the back. So I think they're really wonderful extensions, once again, of hacking traditional printmaking and trying to find out what there is that works for the artist.
So, and this experimentation, this hacking as you call it, that's just part of your everyday job with the various artists that come to Highpoint to see their vision to reality.
Well, and I think it's also important that we don't treat every artist the same, because not everyone has the same relationship to materials, much like every painter uses paint differently, every sculptor uses metal differently, and that we don't try and shoehorn all of our artists into having the same relationship to the materials and being sensitive to what their journey needs to be to realize their artwork.
And many artists that come to Highpoint, some artists perhaps have never made prints before, have made very few prints, and it's a learning experience for them, and you're basically the guide.
Well, and it's a learning experience for us also.
Right.
And that's the wonderful thing is if someone is not already thinking 3 steps ahead in the print process, they're more open to other things that might happen, and they will ask you to do things that don't normally happen in that sequence, and it can lead us into situations that are difficult because maybe something doesn't work out. But it is very important for us to stay open to that, because if an artist suggests something and you say no, and you keep saying no, they lose trust in you. And so that trust in a collaborative situation is very important.
Let's talk about the Sarah Crowner on the opposite side of the gallery here. So we were talking about materials, and we can continue that with Sarah's work called Spotlights. Sarah's better known as a painter, but very much interested in textile, particularly, and collage. I call them experimental paintings, paintings in a loose definition. And for her Highpoint project, she made this diptych, panel A and P and B, which are actually mirror images, printed differently. But I know because of her interest in materials, you and Sarah took a trip to the home remodeling store.
Yes, and her search for what she wanted to do was a contemporary woodcut. She tried different surfaces, and then we went to Home Depot to look at different surfaces there. And she came up with this material called oriented strand board, which is basically pieces of wood glued together. It's a very unstable printing surface, but really beautiful. And the other side is Luan plywood, which is traditionally a mahogany plywood. So yeah, once again, kind of having somebody coming in and looking at how to make a print that's not approaching it from the normal standpoint of I'm going to get something flat. And most printmakers, first thing they think of is linoleum or some surface like that.
Sarah had made many prints before.
She had not.
Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, only one screen print.
Is that right? Okay, wonderful. I think the result is really wonderful. So we'll move on to the next space, and we're going to talk about 3 pieces in this gallery. 2 are sets, and the first is this rather marvelous set of 4 dentalium shell dresses by the Minneapolis-based Gianni Whitehawk. She is of Lakota, German, and Welsh heritage. These dresses, in very brief terms, are homages to the contributions of women to tribal culture and values. Each of the dresses, as you can see, is a different color, but they also have different ornamentation. It's based on some traditional uses of ribbon work, bead work, and I mentioned the dentalium shell, which are mollusk shells in the collar areas of each of the 4 dresses. And she's named each for a value, and they are create, lead, protect, and nurture. I think it's fair to say it's become a fan favorite. Everyone loves this set, and I believe it has sold well, especially to institutional collections. And was she easy to work with, Carl?
She was very easy to work with, but it took a really long time. She started out with the dress forms. Once the dress form and the dentalium yoke were made, she wanted each one to have specific qualities. She spoke with women, mostly relatives, as I understand. She had quite a few collaborators that helped her on this, and each dress is an individual made by one woman for another woman. There are no, these were not made in a factory. Any of these, say, maybe this dragonfly pattern will reappear, but generally their motifs are used differently on each dress. And so she came in and she worked for days and days and days. She brought in ribbons that she would cut, she would arrange, she would move them around, trying to find the composition. And when you try and compose 4 that are relational but different, there were a lot of moving parts, and it took a really long time. She was easy to work with, but it was quite a long project.
Great. Speaking of relational works, we have a series of 4 works by Jim Hodges, originally from Washington State. These are the seasons. Jim is originally from, I mentioned that, Washington State, and nature is sort of a starting point for a lot of his work. You may recall the Walker Art Center retrospective of a few years ago. He's known for his installation, his sculptural work. He works basically in every medium, including printmaking. I like to see, I kind of look at these and say, these are prints, but they're hybrids. They are amazingly complex. There's collage work, there's layering, and I think the result speaks for itself. Really a mesmerizing set of the seasons. It's also my understanding, the longest of Highpoint's project actually spanned 5 years. And I know Cole wanted to talk a little bit about the process of one of the prints, Winter.
Right. Well, Jim started out, he was originally going to do a single print when he came in, and he works through a process that reveals the work as he works. And oftentimes things get destroyed, changed. The process is very important to him. And likewise, in the end, there are a lot of things that are revealed to the viewer. He really doesn't set out with a set idea. As he's working, ideas come up, some are thrown aside. But this particular piece is a couple of etchings, which these 2 plates actually were related to 2 more that were set aside for later. There's color aquatint plate, a black aquatint plate, a piece of Gampi over the top with screen printing, and little diamonds cut in that the viewer can view inside. And most of these do have little peaks of something behind. He really likes, as the work revealed itself to him, he likes for the viewer to find things that reveal themselves with close observation. And it's really important to spend time with these. And Highpoint has a rain garden that the studio overlooks. And the one piece was Winter Speaks, and he came back and eventually did the other 3 seasons. They're not intended to be literal, but I think with viewing you can pretty quickly see how each one relates to the seasons. And they're all very technically complex. I think he took about 9 different visits of at least a week to complete these over 5 years.
Amazing. It really is an amazing set, and again, very successful for Highpoint Editions in terms of the market. Terrific. We're going to talk about one other work in this gallery, back here in the corner. This is work by Julie Buffalo Head. Julie Buffalo Head is a St. Paul-based indigenous artist who has made a number of prints at Highpoint, 10 or 12. This is her most recent print called Tone Deaf. And as you can see, it's quite large. I think, is this her largest print to date? I think. Yes. And it's topical in the sense that it addresses a subject that we have all been living through for the last year and a half, which is the pandemic, COVID-19. And this is, you might say, a debate between the anti-mask faction and the pro-mask faction. What she's done is drawn these 2 beautiful coyotes, and in Native American culture, coyotes can stand for trickster figures. Trickster figures are very, they're complex to explain, but I'll explain it quickly. Their number 1 attribute is ambiguity. So they tend to have a duality. So she's reflecting not only on the coyotes as having a duality, but the duality of the debate between pro-mask, anti-mask. On the mask here, it actually says help. This is a little collage element. And we were talking before, and I was noticing that the gaze of this coyote is directed right at the face of the anti-masker. The anti-masker is holding a little sign called Tone Deaf. And Julie mentioned that this is a reference actually to cartoons, actually. Is it Looney Tunes? It's Wile E. Coyote and the Roadrunner. And of course, those were silent cartoons, and they only used little signs to communicate. So the sign says Tone Deaf. On the 2 edges are traditional Native American ribbon work. And yeah, a terrific piece. You have something to add to this? Cool.
Just that Julie's really known for her beautiful, beautiful drawing ability, sensitive rendering of animals, and she really relates to animals and uses them quite a bit metaphorically, and really gets them right every time. And yeah, it's just a really beautiful piece.
No, she has the knack. It's amazing, her abilities to describe And not in great detail, there's suggestions, but the suggestions really do contribute to the anatomy. To my eye, they always look right on, and really amazing, beautiful, beautiful work. So we'll move into the last gallery. And this is a didactic space, so we thought we would end with what we're calling a pop-up studio, and I think you can see in the corner, courtesy of Highpoint Editions, we have a working etching press, which we were going to do printmaking demonstrations on Saturdays. I think it's 7 Saturdays at 11 a.m. So we'd love to have you stop by and engage in that activity. In addition to that, we have the didactic panels that you saw in the first space, again repeated here with the traditional printmaking techniques. And then at the last minute, we learned of the opportunity to have a progressive proof set of work by Delita Martin, Houston-based American artist. She made a series of 7 prints with Highpoint. They're called keepsakes, and they're basically portraits of children who are friends of hers or who she grew up with. And this is actually a pretty brief progressive proof. There's just the 4 steps from photolithograph to overlay of the lithographic drawing, hand drawn, to the overlay of a collagraph plate of a christening dress, and then finally hand stitching on the far right. And also courtesy of Highpoint Editions, we have is wonderful. We have the original lithography stone that was used that Delita actually drew on. Normally a litho stone would be ground down between projects because they're reused, they're very expensive, actually hard to come by. And you preserve the drawing and inked it up so we can actually see it. And then on the right, we have the original collagraph. In this case, it's an actual antique christening dress that was in the artist's collection. They are sacrificed to make the printing plate. As my understanding, they're dipped or painted with acrylic resin. They're hardened and attached to an aluminum panel. And Cole has inked half of the collagraph to show the process of inking and how then it would be transferred. So we've lined these up so you can actually see both at the same time. But you know, again, a lot of printmaking techniques are a mystery. A lot of it's hidden. And having something like this, I think, really shows in a very easy terms how these things were produced. And we have a few other items that you've probably seen some videos throughout the exhibition. And in the back corner, we have I guess we call it a how-to video where you can engage in some home-based printmaking techniques. But that is the exhibition in a nutshell. I know we've gone very quickly, but we hope you will come and see the show and linger and take your time. Thank you, Cole, for participating. Appreciate it, and all your generous support. None of this would be possible without the support and direct engagement and collaboration of Highpoint Editions. Carla McGrath, Executive Director, Cole Rogers, Master Printer and Artistic Director. Thanks so much.
Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed the tour. We're going to move into the Q&A portion of our program. We do have a question here. How does Highpoint decide on the artists they'll work with? Do the artists approach Highpoint or the other way around, or is it done another way?
A little bit of both, but mostly when we started, we had a curatorial team who would look at artists, and very quickly, because our projects, we can only do about 3 a year. The artist list got longer and longer and longer until, yeah, we've got quite a backlog, but they're usually chosen by us after careful consideration, because these are very few that we can do every year, and they're very expensive. So we do watch artists for several years before approaching them.
And is there anyone that you can talk about that you're possibly starting to work with right now?
Well, we have a piece with Julie Meritu that we're working on, a rather large piece. We also have a piece that was started right at the beginning of the pandemic by Njideka Akanyili Crosby, and we have a few other people that are due to come in. We're also having Julie Buffalo Head come back in. But yeah, it's a constant rolling roster of artists.
And Dennis and Cole, can you tell us a little bit about your interest in prints and where that stemmed from and how you sort of became involved in this type of art making and study?
I'll let Cole go first.
My initial feeling was around the print renaissance of the 50s. Saw quite a few beautiful prints, but then the process really brought me in. I just really have always enjoyed process and fell in love with it right early in my undergrad career, and have spent the last 40-something years pursuing knowing as much as possible and learning as much as possible about it.
And my background actually stems from my undergraduate studies. I was actually a double major in studio art and art history. I wasn't quite sure which direction I wanted to go. And as it turned out, it was pretty clear early on I was a much better writer than I was an artist. So I took the route of art history and museum work. But I've always had this strong interest in printmaking. It's a fascinating set of techniques and processes, and a very, very important, growing importance part of contemporary art as a whole. And Cole and I have known each other for, gosh, a long 25 years. In the 1990s, when Cole was teaching at MCAD, the Minneapolis College of Art and Design, which is right across the park here from the Institute of Arts. He would bring his group over, his students over, and we would help him show works from the museum's collection. And we've been friends and colleagues ever since.
Yeah, and I must say that the resource of the print study room was incredible. I couldn't, I think I was more excited than my students to be able to see the works that I had only seen reproduced. To see them inches from my face was just amazing. And that's part of what really inspired me to start an archive, and the idea that there would be that kind of level of access, and having it at the MIA now, where people can see them for free, is just amazing.
I think that was great foresight on your part, Cole. And you know, the archive is an amazing resource for anyone, but particularly for students and artists. And we hope researchers, scholars that may want to write, study. And it's here in perpetuity now. We will protect it. We will present it, of course, in installations and exhibitions, but it's also accessible, as we've both been mentioning, right here in the print study room. And to me, that's essential. Anything that the museum acquires, we acquire in the public trust, and we have an obligation to provide, not only provide access to, but provide support and interpretation. I guess I'm a big believer in the public aspect of museum collections.
Dennis, can you speak further about MIA's decision to acquire the collection?
Yeah, sure. You know, MIA actually owns two other archives, works on paper. Back in the 1980s and into the early 1990s, we acquired our first collaborative print workshop archive, Vermilion Editions, which was also based in Minneapolis. In 2018, we added a very large zine archive, almost 2,000 works to the collection. For Highpoint, it was easy. So one of the criteria for acquiring an archive is the quality of the work over time. So as a new press, Highpoint was started in 2001 in a storefront on Lyndale Avenue in South Minneapolis. You really have to let the workshop progress. You have to measure the quality, you have to observe. But it was very apparent from early on that Highpoint had very high standards of quality, inviting top artists, local, national, international. But the decision-making process was fairly easy once the archive became available, and it was Highpoint's decision to make it a 20-year archive. And so we started, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Cole, but maybe in 2017 with informal discussions about the possibility. Of course, both institutions are nonprofits with board of directors, so there's a lot of discussions and negotiation that is required. We tend to, I would say, museums tend to move slowly, deliberately, which is a good thing, actually. And so it took a number of years, and actually the formal acquisition didn't occur until December 2020. But the actual decision, for me at least, was easy, and of course presenting it to others, decision makers. But I'm thrilled that the archive is here, and of course Highpoint hasn't closed its doors. They will continue to produce work into the future, and we actually Highpoint and MIA have a agreement in place that every 5 years we will revisit the idea of expanding the archive. Of course, it would be up to both institutions to make that decision moving forward, but that's an exciting prospect. In many cases, in fact, maybe in most cases, museum workshop archives are closed. So it's a specific time period. But being that we're both in Minneapolis and we're so close as institutions and we've collaborated over the years, I think this structure is actually a real positive.
I have a couple of questions here about specific artists. One of them is about Julie Buffalo Head. How many works by Julie Buffalo Head do you have in the exhibit? And can anyone talk a bit more about her materiality and the metaphors she uses in her drawings?
Sure. There are 6 examples of Julie's work in the exhibition. And Julie's very well known here in Minneapolis. As I mentioned in the recorded portion, she is an indigenous artist, member of the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma. She lives in St. Paul. And her work really centers on the deconstruction of myths and misconceptions, so we say, between native and non-native cultures. And she uses mainly animals as narrative devices, anthropomorphized animals. Cole mentioned that as well, to tell tales, to create new ideas, alternate histories, if you will, and dispelling stereotypes. And this has been a consistent theme throughout her work. And materiality, she's worked, maybe Cole can address that, and what type of techniques. I think it varies quite a bit amongst the approximately 10 prints she made.
Right, and lately she seems to be doing more and more kind of collage or adding elements to the surface. But yeah, she's always been very sensitive as far as the materials that she uses.
Yeah. And I'll just add that even before she first came to Highpoint, I added a number of her drawings to Mia's collection. I was mesmerized by her ability to depict animals. They are absolutely extraordinary. So I was happy to be able to do that quite a few years ago. And so when she came to Highpoint, we were actually excited about that as well. and so we have a very nice selection of her work now at MIA.
I have another materials related question. In the last gallery with the printing stone/slate that is generally ground down and reused, what is it made of and why is it rare?
It is a piece of Bavarian limestone from the Solhofen quarry. If you lived in Minneapolis, you could go down, or the Twin Cities, you could go down to the river and see limestone in the banks, but it's really crumbly. And to get a piece of limestone of that quality is pretty difficult. And the specific quarry that comes out of is unique, that there are not a lot of fossils in the pieces, and they were mined over 100 years ago and used for commercial printing, and many were destroyed, and the ones that are still around are rather rare and very expensive. That stone purchased from a company would probably cost at least $2,000 to $3,000, if not more, especially because of its color, which is gray.
And now I have a question. Now that we've had 20 years of Highpoint, what do you hope, Cole, for the next 20 years coming up?
That's a great question, because you know, there's always this expectation of growth, or you know, things always are supposed to get bigger and bigger or whatever. And I would be very happy to see Highpoint continue along the same lines that it has. I think pursuing quality, pursuing the best artists that we can attract. Also part of what we do is educational. And I think that moving into the future, continuing to bring in the next generation that appreciates prints and collects prints and supports arts organizations. Yeah, I think I'm very pleased. I think that when Carla and I set out, we had some pretty clear goals, and I don't think it's hard to say that I think we met all those goals so far. And I think if we can continue strong into the future, I'd be very happy.
All right, I think we're gonna wrap it up there. It's 3:15. I know we are a little bit over time already. I just wanted to thank everyone for attending. Again, this is the MIA special exhibition that is currently on view. It will be on view through January 9th. You can reserve your tickets online. We are very excited to see you. The tour was wonderful virtually. The artwork and the installation is even more exceptional when you see it in person. And thank you again. We hope to see you at the museum soon.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.